Maureen bought a $5 shack, shocked to find a German shepherd guarding the place. The gravel cracked under Jake Mercer's boots as he stepped out of the rusted pickup and shut the door with a hollow clunk. The shack sat like a forgotten relic at the edge of the Appalachians, sagging in the middle like it had taken one too many hits from time and decided not to get back up. $5 and a scribbled signature on a county auction slip. No questions asked, no inspections. It had been exactly what he wanted. Silence, until he saw her. There, on the warped wooden porch, stood a German shepherd. No leash, no collar, just bone-deep stillness and eyes like golden glass. Jake stopped mid-step. His instincts kicked in before his breath caught. No sudden movements, no direct stare. His training didn't care that this was a backwoods shack and not a battlefield. The dog didn't growl, didn't bark, just stood her ground, blocking the doorway like she owned it. Jake's eyes narrowed. Her coat was rough, patches matted and scarred. The kind of marks that didn't come from old age or a careless life in the wild. She was lean, muscled, alert, trained. His pulse didn't quicken, but something in his chest shifted. He lowered his pack slowly to the dirt, never taking his eyes off her. "Not looking to take your spot," he said quietly. "Just need a roof and no neighbors." She didn't react. Not a twitch, not a blink. As if his words were just wind. He eased down onto the edge of the porch, leaving distance between them. 3 boards, give or take. She didn't move. Jake leaned forward, rested his elbows on his knees. The wind rustled through the trees behind him, but the silence between them held heavier than any storm. For a full 5 minutes, neither of them moved. Then it came. A soft sound. High-pitched, fragile. Jake tensed. It came again. A faint whimper from inside the shack. The dog's ears twitched. Not towards him. Towards the door. "You're not alone," Jake murmured. She stood, slowly, with purpose. Still didn't bark. Just turned her head toward the cracked doorframe, her posture shifting. Not aggression. Fatigue. The kind that comes after standing guard too long. She stepped aside. Not welcoming him. Not submitting. Just deciding. Jake rose carefully. The air in the doorway felt different, like it hadn't been stirred in weeks. Inside, dust floated like ghosts in the filtered light. The smell of old pine and something else. Dirt, fur, time. In the far corner, tucked into a nest of fabric and old rags, were 3 small pups. Eyes barely open, ears still folded, breathing in that unsteady, shallow way newborns do. Jake exhaled. It wasn't quite wonder, and it wasn't sorrow, but it landed somewhere between. He didn't move closer, didn't dare. Behind him, the shepherd stepped to the doorway, blocking it again, not between him and the pups, but beside him now. "I'm not here to hurt them," he said. She didn't blink, but she didn't bare her teeth either. That was enough. Jake stepped back onto the porch and sat down again. The dog remained at the door, her tail curling neatly beside her, watching the forest, watching him, watching everything. Dusk settled fast in the mountains. By the time the last light disappeared beyond the ridge, the temperature dropped hard. Jake pulled his coat tighter but didn't go inside. It wasn't his place. Not yet. The dog never left her post, and he didn't ask her to. She lay down by the door eventually, ears still flicking with every sound. Jake glanced at the photograph he pulled from his inside pocket. The creases were deep, the colors faded. His wife's laugh frozen mid-motion, their son reaching toward the camera. Gone now. Months ago. Taken in one instant by a reckless driver and an intersection too quiet for sirens. This place wasn't meant to heal him. It was meant to bury the noise. but now it held something else. He stared at the picture a long while until a soft shuffle pulled his attention back. The dog was sitting up again, gaze fixed on something past the tree line. Jake turned his head, listened. A second later, he heard it too. Crunching, heavy, out of rhythm with the wind. Boots. Someone was coming. And just like that, the dog rose. Not slowly, not cautiously. This time it was fast, controlled, like flipping a switch. She didn't bark. She moved like a shadow across the porch and positioned herself squarely in front of Jake. Jake stood, heart pounding, hand instinctively brushing the knife on his belt. A figure appeared between the trees. A man. Civilian clothes. Backpack slung over one shoulder. Looked mid-30s, hair matted with sweat. The man froze when he saw the shepherd. Jake stepped forward. "You lost?" he asked. The man's eyes flicked to him. Then the dog. Then back again. I thought this place was empty," he said, voice shaking. Jake said nothing. The shepherd didn't growl, but her body was rigid, head low, eyes locked. "You came through the trees for an empty shack?" Jake asked. The man hesitated. "There's, some metal deposits nearby. I work with a survey company. We got maps that showed—" Jake didn't move, but his jaw tightened. "There's nothing for you here," he said. The man took one step back, then another. He nodded fast. "Yeah, sure. Just checking. My bad." He turned and vanished into the trees. Jake didn't chase. The dog didn't move. Only after the woods swallowed him did she relax. Just barely. Jake looked at her. "You knew before I did," he whispered. She didn't respond. Didn't need to. Some dogs bark to make noise. This one didn't bark at all, but she knew exactly when to stand, and when not to let anyone pass. The morning came slow, like the mountain had no urgency to wake. Jake sat on the edge of the porch again, shoulders hunched, a tin cup of bitter instant coffee cooling between his palms. The air bit at the back of his neck. Thin frost clung to the grass and the roof shingles. Fog curled in the trees like it had nowhere else to go. She was still there. The German shepherd hadn't moved far during the night. Just shifted position, now lying just inside the doorway, half-shadowed. Her ears flicked at every sound. But she didn't sleep. Not really. Not with him near. She kept herself angled, half watching the cabin, half watching him. He hadn't given her a name. Yet she moved with the kind of weight that asked for one. "Raya," he murmured under his breath, testing it. The dog didn't react. Jake took a sip from the cup and grimaced. He glanced sideways. "I figure you've earned something more than hey dog," he said, voice soft and worn. "So, Raya it is." Still nothing. But she hadn't left either. And in that silence, Jake found enough permission to keep going. He reached into the inner pocket of his coat and pulled out a worn photograph. Folded twice, creased at the edges. He unfolded it with care, like it might rip under too much memory. A woman laughing, red curls catching the sun. A boy beside her, no older than 8, arms mid-air like he was flying. Jake held the picture up just enough for the dog to see, though he wasn't sure why. "This was them," he said. "My whole world, until the guy in the box truck decided to blow through a red light 2 weeks before Christmas." The wind didn't answer. Raya didn't move, but the porch felt heavier. "I tried to fix it," he said. "The house, the photos, the silence. I really tried." He blinked hard and folded the photo, slipped it back into his coat. "That didn't work, so I came here. $5 and a broken-down shack felt like a better deal than 4 walls full of ghosts." Raya finally shifted. Not toward him, but toward the cabin again. Her ears twitched, her posture changing. Then Jake heard it. A faint sound, like a whimper muffled by distance and wood. Not a dream, not the wind. Another whimper. Then the soft shuffle of something small. Jake froze. He glanced at Raya. Her body had gone still, but not stiff. Her tail low, her gaze locked inside the shack. "You're hiding more than just yourself," he whispered. She stood slowly and stepped back into the shadows of the cabin. She didn't close him out, but she didn't invite him either. Jake stood, setting the coffee cup aside. He wiped his palms on his jeans and stepped cautiously into the dark doorway. The air inside held weight, the kind of quiet that wasn't absence. It was guarding. Light filtered through the warped boards, making stripes on the dusty floor. The smell of pine needles, dry earth, and old fabric filled the space. In the back corner, under what looked like a pile of torn blankets, something moved. He crouched low, eyes adjusting. 3 tiny shapes wriggled against each other, paws twitching, eyes half closed. Pups, barely born. Jake didn't speak. Behind him, he felt Raya's presence. Not just standing, watch, deciding. He backed away slowly, giving the space back to her. When he reached the porch, he sat again. Same place, same distance. This time Raya followed. She lay down on the top step, close enough for breath, still far enough to deny familiarity. Jake exhaled. He stared out towards the tree line. "Guess you're not just guarding the place," he muttered. "You're guarding them." The wind moved through the pine branches like a whisper too low to hear. Jake watched it roll over the forest, thinking maybe the mountains really did listen. The rest of the day passed in small tasks. He unpacked the essentials: water filter, tarp, folding knife. Laid out his gear on the side of the porch where it wouldn't intrude. Every time he moved, Raya's eyes followed. Not in suspicion, in calculation. He kept his distance. Always in sight, always deliberate. Every piece of gear placed without noise. When he found the old axe rusted beneath the porch, he spent an hour sanding the handle smooth again. Not to make it sharp, just to give his hand something to hold that didn't shake. By afternoon, he'd cleared the brush near the cabin's back wall and found the firewood pile. Old but dry. That was when he noticed the odd pattern in the soil. A perimeter. Not wild undergrowth, but smoothed paths. Intentional. Someone had lived here longer than the auction paperwork said. Inside the cabin, Raya returned to the pups, feeding them, cleaning them, then coming back to the porch as dusk fell. Jake didn't need confirmation. He knew now, this wasn't a stray dog. This was a mother, a soldier, a sentry. He didn't speak much after sunset, just built a fire in a ring of old stones, watched the flames rise steady. Raya didn't approach, but she didn't retreat either. She lay 3 steps from him, the glow of the fire painting gold along her ribs. Jake pulled his knees up, arms draped over them. "I think I get it now," he said. She didn't react. "You stayed because no one else did." The fire popped once. The sky darkened fully. Jake leaned his head back against the cabin wall and looked up at the stars slicing the night sky. He heard her move. Not away. Toward. When he looked again, Raya had settled beside the porch post, just close enough for the firelight to catch her eyes. Still alert, still watching, but no longer alone. By the 4th morning, Jake knew the cabin hadn't been abandoned nearly as long as the deed implied. It was in the little things. The hinges on the back door weren't rusted through like the front. The porch steps had new nails in old wood. A clean cut of rope hung from a nail on the inside beam, weathered but not frayed. This place hadn't been forgotten. It had been left behind. On purpose. Jake squatted beside a worn trail behind the cabin, eyes scanning the soft earth. Faint impressions in the soil, boot prints partially washed by rain, but deep, heavy tread, not a hiker's stride. Same path, over and over. He followed the trail 50 yards into the trees before it looped back. A tight circuit, a patrol route. Jake stood still for a long minute, listening to the forest breathe. Wind rustled the canopy. Far off, a crow called once and fell silent. He walked back to the cabin with a weight in his chest that had nothing to do with fear. It was familiarity. He knew what it meant when someone circled the same ground every morning and night, when paths were walked not for destination, but for defense. Someone had lived here like it was a post. And now he was standing on it. Raya was waiting on the porch when he returned, sitting like she hadn't moved. Her gaze tracked him from tree line to doorstep. Jake dropped his bag beside the steps and looked at her. "You knew him, didn't you?" Raya didn't respond, but she didn't break eye contact either. He walked past her toward the collapsed section of the porch roof. One of the support beams had split clean down the center. The tarp he'd hung over it wasn't holding. Rain would get in soon. He grabbed the axe, tested the handle, and crossed to the stacked lumber he'd dragged up yesterday. The rhythm of work grounded him. Measure, cut, haul, repeat. It didn't fix things, but it dulled the ache for a while. By late afternoon, the sun had begun to dip. He knelt by the outer post, dragging aside the mossy rocks piled near the base to make room for a new brace. And there it was, a flat stone, too smooth, too square to be natural. Jake brushed away the moss with his gloved hand. Beneath it, wood, weathered, dry, sealed, a box. He froze. Raya stepped closer, just enough that her paws brushed against the edge of his peripheral vision. Her posture shifted, not alarmed, but taut, watching. Jake pried the box free, lifting it from the shallow hole. It was heavy, cedar by the scent. Brass hinges greened from time. No lock, just a single rusted clasp. He hesitated, then opened it. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, were carefully arranged items. A black leather-bound notebook, a folded stack of high-resolution satellite photos, a rolled topographic map tied with twine, and beneath all that, a plain white envelope. Handwritten across the front, Jake Mercer. His breath hitched. He hadn't told anyone where he was going. The property had transferred through an online auction house, no face-to-face. He'd used a P.O. box in Knoxville, no friends, no forwarding address. No one was supposed to know. And yet someone had written his name like they'd expected him. Raya stood motionless behind him. Her ears twitched, but she didn't step away. Jake sat down right there in the dirt and opened the envelope. The letter was short, sharp handwriting, clean lines. "Jake, if you're reading this, then I'm gone, and it's your turn. I served with your father. Afghanistan, 2005. He saved my life near Jalalabad. Said I'd pay it forward someday. I didn't expect it to be like this. There's something under this mountain, something worth hiding. But more than that, something worth protecting. Watch the maps. Trust the dog. This place is yours now, if you choose it." Samuel Trent Jake lowered the paper, his hands gone still. Trent. The name flickered like an old bulb in the back of his memory. He remembered his dad once talking about a geologist with a bum knee and a sixth sense for reading terrain like Braille. The guy was paranoid, quiet, but loyal. Jake looked up. Raya hadn't moved. "You were his," Jake whispered. Her tail didn't wag, her ears didn't drop, but something softened in her gaze. Not recognition exactly, but memory. Jake unfolded the map. Hand-drawn marks, grid coordinates, notes in the margins. Subsurface anomaly, keep hidden. Another section circled twice in red ink. Avoid disturbance, ecological threat. He flipped through the satellite photos. Most were of the mountain, angles from different years. A few showed lines cut into the earth. Survey markings. Then one caught him. a grainy shot from a security drone, probably years old. But in the corner of the frame stood the unmistakable silhouette of a German shepherd, facing the camera, alone. Jake turned to Raya. "You've been here this whole time." This wasn't just a stray. She was a soldier too. He stood and carried the box back to the porch, set it down beside his gear. The sun had dipped below the ridge, shadows stretching long across the clearing. Jake didn't speak again that night. He just sat by the fire, watching the flames curl upward. Raya lay beside the porch, eyes on the tree line. They didn't need to say anything. They both knew what it meant to guard something that couldn't speak for itself, and what it felt like when the world tried to forget what mattered. Jake closed his eyes and listened to the fire crackle. The dog didn't bark. She didn't need to. The rain came hard that night, drumming on the tin roof like a restless heartbeat. Jake sat inside the cabin, the cedar box open beside the dying fire, Samuel Trent's letter laid flat across his lap. The ink had bled slightly at the edges, like the writer had known the paper would outlive him. He read it again, slow this time. "If you're reading this, then I'm gone." Gone. The word felt final in a way death usually doesn't. Jake set the letter down and picked up the notebook that had been inside the box. The pages smelled faintly of graphite and pine resin. Every line of Samuel Trent's handwriting was meticulous, deliberate. Coordinates, depth readings, mineral densities. Then came a section labeled Core Samples. The numbers didn't mean much to Jake, but the notes in the margins did. Vein concentration high. Rare earth confirmed. Must keep hidden. If discovered, water table collapse imminent. He turned the page and stopped. A sentence circled twice in red ink. "They'll come for it eventually." The handwriting trembled slightly beneath that line, as if the man had written it, knowing exactly who they were. Jake leaned back against the cabin wall. The wood creaked under his shoulders. Outside, the storm rolled through the valley in waves, thunder distant but deliberate. Raya lay near the door, head lifted, eyes fixed on him. She hadn't slept once since the first drop fell. "You were his," Jake said softly. "Weren't you?" Raya blinked slowly, as if weighing whether he was worthy of the truth. Jake looked back at the map spread across the floorboards. A familiar shape emerged, the mountain ridge itself, drawn in careful contour lines. But what made his chest tighten was the area marked with a single black X near the cabin's base. Next to it the words, "Primary deposit, not for extraction." He rubbed his temples, thinking of Trent's warning. He flipped back to the letter. "There's something under this mountain. Something worth hiding. But more than that, something worth protecting. Watch the maps. Trust the dog." Jake looked up again. "Trust the dog," he whispered. The words sat heavy between them. He thought about the tracks he'd seen in the mud the day before, the clean cuts in the underbrush, the way some of the nails in the doorframe looked new. This place wasn't just a refuge. It was a position, and Raya wasn't a stray. He studied her now, the scars on her flank, the posture that spoke of training. There was too much discipline in the way she scanned the windows, the door, the tree line. Not fear, protocol. He reached slowly for the pack he'd left by the bed. Inside, he still had his old service flashlight, the kind that survived desert heat and saltwater corrosion. He clicked it on, the beam cutting across the room. Raya didn't flinch. She just watched. Jake crouched beside her. "You've done this before, haven't you?" he said. For the first time, Raya's tail shifted. Not wagging. Just a single, controlled motion. Jake exhaled through his nose. "Who trained you?" He reached for the notebook again and flipped through the back pages. Near the end, tucked into a fold, was a smaller scrap of paper, yellowed and smudged. Written in the same hand, "Raya, Former K-9 unit, disavowed after strike at Al Rawda, Iraq. Rescued and reclassified under civilian care. Jake stared at the words. His father had been stationed near Al Rawda. The pieces began to align, painfully slow, like an old safe unlocking. He looked down at Raya. "You were there," he murmured. "You saw him, didn't you?" "My dad." Raya's ears flicked at the sound of his voice. "Trent must have found you after, brought you back here, and now—" He glanced at the letter. "Now you're still guarding what he couldn't." The fire cracked. Jake rose and walked toward the small window facing the valley. In the distance, flashes of lightning illuminated the tree line. The mountain looked endless in the dark, old and unyielding. He felt the weight of something bigger pressing in, the realization that this wasn't random, that Samuel Trent had known who would come next. His eyes fell to the bottom of the letter again. "You don't have to fight, Jake. Just guard it. That's enough." Jake read the line twice, then folded the letter carefully, as if afraid to tear it. He whispered, "You didn't know my father died last year, did you, Trent?" The storm outside deepened. Jake thought he heard something between thunderclaps, a faint mechanical hum. Not the wind, not natural. He turned off the flashlight. The cabin plunged into darkness, save for the faint orange glow of dying embers. Raya lifted her head, ears alert. "You hear it too," he said. The hum faded, then returned, closer. Jake crouched by the window, peering through a gap in the wood. Nothing but shifting branches and rain. Still, the sound remained, a low vibration like an engine idling. He grabbed his jacket, slung it over his shoulder, and stepped onto the porch. The rain hit him instantly, cold and sharp. Raya followed, silent as a shadow. They moved to the edge of the clearing. Jake knelt, hand brushing the wet soil. 2 new tire tracks cut through the mud, deep, fresh, heavy. "Someone's been here," he whispered. Raya's head turned toward the trail leading down the slope. She stood rigid, nostrils flaring, reading the world the way soldiers read silence. Jake followed her line of sight, but the darkness swallowed everything. He looked down at her, heart pounding. He said they'd come for it eventually. Raya didn't move. She didn't need to. The message was clear. It had already begun. It started with the silence. Not the peaceful kind Jake had grown used to, but the off-kilter hush that made the hair on the back of his neck rise. The birds had stopped. The usual whisper of breeze through pine needles was absent. Even the distant call of the stream had muted like the mountain was holding its breath. Jake stepped out of the cabin with his mug half full, eyes narrowing. Raya was already at the edge of the clearing, tail low, head up, body rigid. She didn't growl. She didn't look at him. Her focus was locked down the trail, ears rotating with precision. Then he saw them. 2 sets of deep tire tracks carved through the wet soil, slicing across the access path like claw marks. Wide, aggressive tread, not from locals. Not hikers. These were fresh, still glistening where water had yet to settle. Jake crouched and placed his fingertips lightly into the grooves. Raya let out a low exhale, more breath than sound. "Yeah," Jake muttered. "We've got company." He moved fast. Inside the cabin, he grabbed the field binoculars from his pack and slung the leather journal back into its hidden compartment under the floorboards. He didn't touch the cedar box. He already knew what was inside, and if things went sideways, better that it stayed buried. With Raya beside him, Jake took off up the western ridge, veering through thick underbrush, until they reached a familiar outcrop Trent had marked on his map, a natural blind with a clear view of the lower trail. He dropped to his stomach and pressed the binoculars to his eyes. The dirt path below curved like a snake through the trees. Then he saw them. 3 matte black SUVs crept up the incline like predators. No logos, no plates, no hesitation. Behind the last vehicle, a flatbed truck rumbled forward, a heavy tarp covering something large and angular. Equipment, big, industrial. Jake's jaw tightened. These men weren't scouting. They were preparing to extract or erase. The vehicle stopped in formation at a wide bend in the trail. Doors opened. 6 men stepped out, all in tactical gear that looked military but wasn't. Their movements were crisp, synchronized. No chatter, no wasted motion. But it was the man in the center who caught Jake's attention. Tall, fit, late 40s. His posture was ramrod straight, not from training, but command. Field jacket zipped to the chin, gloves tight. His face was sharp, controlled. A man used to being obeyed. Jake adjusted the focus. The man turned, revealing a badge stitched onto his sleeve. Kelworth Security Division. Jake muttered under his breath. Rena. The name hit like a gut punch. Samuel Trent had written it in angry ink on the back of the journal. Circled twice. Underlined once. A man who didn't just work for Kelworth, but orchestrated its dirtiest operations. Jake scanned the scene again. One of the younger men unloaded a silver case from the SUV, moving like it held something delicate. Another man checked what looked like a core drill. Compact, but high-powered. They weren't just prospecting. They were here to dig. Fast, and without witnesses. From beside him, Raya let out a low vibration deep in her chest. Not loud, not warning, but instinct. Jake put a hand on her flank. I see it, he said. Rena stepped forward and gestured sharply. His men fanned out like they'd done this before. One unrolled topographic maps across the hood. Another pointed toward the ridge. Jake didn't need to hear the words. He saw the intent in every move. This was a military op wearing a corporate mask. One man, fidgeting, lit a cigarette and muttered something. The other replied, loud enough to carry faintly on the wind. You think it's really under there? Rena didn't look up. Keane kept it buried. It's still there, and if someone else found it... Jake watched him stop mid-sentence. Rena turned his head slowly, scanning the tree line like he felt something. His eyes passed over Jake's position, then kept moving. Jake exhaled slowly. This wasn't a mistake. They knew what they were looking for. He slid back from the ridge, motioning to Raya. She followed, every muscle primed. Back under the canopy, Jake crouched in the shadow of an old pine. We need to move, he whispered. Raya stared up at him, eyes calm but unreadable. She didn't resist. She didn't question. They cut through the woods in tight formation, circling back towards the cabin. Jake kept low, every step calculated. No broken branches. No sound above the forest's own heartbeat. When they reached the clearing again, Jake slipped inside the cabin and lifted the floorboard. He stared at the cedar box for a moment, then reached for the maps instead. If Rena's team found the place and saw signs of disturbance, they'd tear it apart. He buried the maps deeper, beneath an old panel near the hearth. Stones, dirt, silence. Outside he heard the faint hum of engines. The trucks were moving again. Raya stood at the door, pressed to the frame like a statue. Her gaze didn't waver. Jake whispered, "We hold position." She stepped down from the porch and disappeared into the tree line like smoke. Not running. Taking post. He followed. The mountain held its breath, and the war that wasn't supposed to come to this place had already arrived. The pups were already stirring before dawn, soft whimpers rising like breath from their nest. Jake crouched beside them in the fading dark, hands steady as he layered old flannel into a makeshift sling across his chest. Their small bodies were warm and squirming, oblivious to what loomed outside. He looked over his shoulder. Raya stood in the doorway, her silhouette framed by moonlight. She hadn't slept, not since the trucks arrived. Jake lifted one pup, then another, nestling them gently into the sling until all three were tucked against his chest. Tiny heartbeats pressed into his ribs. He wrapped the fabric snug and tested his movement. Limited but manageable. He exhaled once, slow and quiet. Time to go. Raya stepped aside, giving him a clear path. She didn't need a command. She moved with him, instinct guiding each step. They kept low, cutting east toward the dry creek bed Jake had noted days ago. It was narrow but winding and deep enough to hide them from any casual scan. The forest felt tighter now, like it knew what was about to happen. Somewhere behind them, a vehicle door slammed. Jake froze. Raya did too. Voices drifted through the trees, sharp, clipped, too calm for anything honest. He pushed forward, boots finding purchase in soft earth, every step practiced. Years of patrols in villages that didn't exist on maps had taught him how to vanish. But this time, he wasn't walking for intel. He was walking for lives that couldn't yet run. The creek bed opened ahead. Jake dropped into it with care, crouching low. Raya followed, leaping in with barely a sound. They moved like ghosts. He could feel the pups breathing through the sling, feel their small movements as they adjusted to the cold. A crack behind them. Not wood, not animal. A voice. Close. Cabin's cold, but someone's been there. Another voice. Footprints, small ones too. Jake's jaw clenched. They'd seen the pup's trail. He leaned into Raya. Time to move. She didn't look back. She turned and led the way deeper into the ravine, cutting across a break in the hillside Jake hadn't noticed before. Her steps were exact, her pauses precise. She wasn't just reacting, she was remembering. This wasn't her first retreat through these woods. They reached a narrow shelf tucked beneath two moss-covered boulders. Raya stopped, glanced back once, then vanished into a crawl space barely wide enough for a man. Jake followed, adjusting the sling to keep the pups close. The space opened just enough for him to lie flat. Cold, dry, safe. For now. He lay there in the dark, listening. The forest didn't speak, but it watched. Then the sky lit up orange. A low boom echoed through the hills. Jake rolled to his side and peered through the break in the stone. Flames. They were burning the cabin. Sparks licked the night sky, casting long shadows across the treetops. Smoke curled through the forest like a warning too late. He felt it before he heard it. Raya's shift. She rose without a sound, ears angled toward the fire, muscles tense. Then came the crunch of boots. 3 men, rifles slung, moving through the trees with purpose. One carried a canister, nozzle gleaming even in low light. Accelerant. Jake's pulse steadied. Not panic. Preparation. He looked at Raya. She already knew. This wasn't about fighting to win. This was about slowing them down. He slid from the crawl space and set the sling deep in the hollow, wrapping a tarp over the pups. Raya circled them once, nose brushing each gently, then turned and faced Jake. He nodded. Let's make it count. They moved fast and low through the undergrowth, circling wide to flank the cabin. The flames had caught now, eating through the roof like dry paper. The men stood at the edge, silhouetted by firelight. Jake spotted their leader, tall, broad, helmeted, scanning the area with night vision goggles. The others were distracted, focused on the burn. Confident. Too confident. Jake signaled to Raya with 2 fingers. She vanished into the brush. The first man never saw her coming. She hit him low, slamming him into a downed log. His weapon clattered as he howled in shock. She didn't bite. She didn't need to. She pinned him, teeth bared but holding. The second man turned, raising his rifle. Jake was already moving. He tackled him hard, shoulder first, driving the air from the man's lungs. The rifle skidded across the dirt. Jake didn't aim to kill, just disarm, disable. A quick elbow to the temple, and the man went down in a heap. The third shouted and reached for his radio. Jake ripped the flame canister from his hands and shoved it backward into his gut. The man stumbled, wheezing. Then a boot to the knee. He dropped. The fight was over in less than 10 seconds. Not one shot fired. Jake stood over the 3 bodies, breathing hard but steady. Raya trotted to his side, panting, eyes still scanning. He looked at her. "We're not here to win the war," he muttered. "Just hold the damn line." Behind them, the cabin groaned as its frame gave in. A roar of flame as the roof collapsed. Sparks showered upward like a dying star. Jake turned toward the ravine. "Let's get back to them." They disappeared into the trees again, swallowed by darkness. Raya didn't look back. She didn't need to. She knew the job wasn't over. Not yet. Smoke coiled through the trees like a living thing, thick and low and choking. Jake moved fast. The pups pressed tight against his chest in the sling, every breath pulled through clenched teeth. He could taste ash on the back of his tongue, feel the fire even though the blaze was a half-mile behind them. The cabin was gone. But not the evidence. He adjusted the sling with one hand and gripped the leather-wrapped satchel with the other. The backup drive, Trent's journal, topographic maps, and the battered recorder still carrying Samuel Trent's voice. Proof of everything. Kelworth's surveys, their drills, their orders to burn it all. Ahead, Raya moved like a ghost, weaving through trees and brush, pausing only to glance back to ensure he was still close. Her coat shimmered with soot, ears up, tail low. She wasn't running from the fire. She was guiding him toward something. Jake spotted the stack of stones tucked beneath the bluff, half covered in moss and pine needles. Just like the map had said. A false rock face, wedged into place by time and secrecy. The kind you'd miss unless someone taught you where to look. He dropped to his knees and began shifting stone. Raya stood guard behind him, nose to the wind. One pup let out a weak squeak, muffled by the sling. Jake didn't stop. The last rock rolled free. Behind it, darkness. A crawl space just high enough for a man, framed with rough-cut timbers and braced by ancient roots. Jake reached for the flashlight, clicked it on, and shone it into the void. Dry. Narrow. The earth sloped downward. Trent's tunnel. He turned to Raya. "In." She went first, tail disappearing into the dark. Jake followed, adjusting his body to keep the pups close and the satchel tight. Dirt scraped his elbows. Roots tugged at his sleeves. The scent of damp soil and cedar filled the space. It wasn't just a tunnel. It was a lifeline. Behind them, the night lit orange as the fire reached the treetops. Wood cracked. Something, maybe the porch, collapsed with a long, splintering groan. Jake didn't look back. He pressed on, crawling behind Raya, the flashlight beam dancing over ribbed walls and markings burned into timber. The tunnel curved, then dropped sharply. He slid, boots scraping, one hand shielding the pups. The floor leveled. Cold air hit his face. Ahead, Raya had stopped. Jake shone the light past her. The tunnel ended in a rock-framed opening that led onto a narrow ledge carved into the side of the mountain. The fire's glow had dimmed here, just a dull smear in the distance. But the wind was strong, and the stars above were untouched. Then came the sound. "Thwop, thwop, thwop!" Jake's head snapped up. He scanned the sky. A rotor blade sliced through the dark. Then a second. Closer now. A helicopter arced in from the northwest, its searchlight blinking once, then locking onto them. Raya stood at the edge of the ledge, unflinching in the wash of light. Jake stepped forward and waved one arm, the other holding the satchel. The radio at his hip crackled. "Riker, this is Special Agent Natalie Brooks. Do not move. We see you." Jake exhaled, more relief than breath. "I've got the evidence," he said into the radio. "Trent's files, everything." the voice replied without hesitation. Copy. Hold tight. I'm coming down. The rotor pitch shifted. A metal basket descended on a cable, guided by a tactical agent in full gear, visor down. He landed with practiced grace and unclipped. Are you Jake Riker? The man shouted over the wind. Yeah, pups first, Jake said, unslinging the bundle. The agent took the sling carefully, securing it inside the rescue basket. Jake handed off the satchel next. Don't drop that. It's the whole story. The agent gave a tight nod. Understood. Raya stepped beside Jake as the basket lifted, carrying the pups towards the sky. Another cable lowered. The agent motioned to Jake. You're next. Jake stepped in, but Raya didn't follow. He turned. Come on, we're done. She didn't move. The blades roared. The ledge trembled. Jake dropped to one knee and met her eyes. We don't have to run anymore. He sent both of us. We finish it, together. Raya stepped in. Jake wrapped his arm around her shoulders as the basket rose. The fire glowed behind them, distant now. The mountain, though wounded, still stood. Inside the chopper, Agent Brooks waited, headset on, eyes sharp. Jake collapsed onto the floor as they lifted off. He felt the cold of the steel, the warmth of the pups breathing against his chest. Brooks leaned in. You held the line. Jake didn't speak. He looked down at Raya, who lay beside him, eyes half closed, finally letting herself rest. The tunnel had brought them out, but it was the dog who got them through. The wind howled through the open door of the FBI helicopter, rattling through the steel hull as the mountain receded below them, an orange glow still smoldering beneath black smoke. Jake sat against the wall, the sling of pups nestled securely between his knees. Across from him, Agent Natalie Brooks secured the satchel of evidence like it was a live explosive. Her expression was calm, but focused. Raya lay stretched beside him, her chest rising and falling slowly. Not asleep, but not tense either. She hadn't taken her eyes off the open door until the cabin disappeared completely beneath the clouds. No one spoke for a long time. When they landed at the Bureau's temporary field command outside Asheville, Jake stepped out first. The pups were quickly handed off to a veterinary team waiting nearby. Brooks kept the satchel in hand, refusing to let anyone else touch it. In the following hours, things moved fast. Satellite photos from Trent's archive were uploaded to secure servers. Audio logs verified the existence of illegal mineral extraction, forged permits, and buried environmental impact reports. Multiple encrypted documents tied Kelworth Minerals to off-the-record drilling operations across federal lands, with signatures that included names from both the private sector and local government offices. But what mattered most were the field notes, Samuel Trent's own handwriting, cross-referenced with GPS timestamps and geological data. It wasn't just circumstantial, it was irrefutable. Brooks walked into the media tent at 4 a.m. Sharp, a file tucked under one arm and a grim resolve carved into her face. Cameras clicked. The press corps leaned forward. She opened with a single sentence. We have evidence of coordinated environmental sabotage tied to Kelworth Minerals, including planned destruction of protected land to cover illegal drilling activity. An hour later, the first subpoenas were issued. By sunrise, the Department of Justice had opened a full investigation. And by nightfall, Marcus Rena was in custody. He'd been caught at the Canadian border with 2 burner phones, false IDs, and a duffel bag stuffed with cash. The USB drive in his pocket was nearly identical to the one Jake had carried down the mountain, right down to the folder labeled K-Project Archives. When federal agents questioned him, he didn't speak. He didn't deny. He just looked tired. Victor Kellerman, CEO of Kelworth, disappeared from public view within 24 hours. His legal team issued a vague statement about internal audits and compliance errors. It didn't matter. The truth had already reached the public. News outlets splashed headlines across screens nationwide. Satellite images of scorched land juxtaposed with photos of Jake standing in the helicopter bay, a dog at his side, and 3 pups cradled in his arms. The story wrote itself. The soldier who saved a mountain. The whistleblower's dog who refused to leave. The man who didn't want attention, but had it anyway. Brooks did the interviews. She presented the evidence in hearings, her tone clinical and direct. She never once took credit. Jake didn't do a single interview. Not one. When reporters came to the camp, he was already gone. He'd slipped out quietly, leaving nothing but a note with Brooks. "Thank you for listening. I need quiet again." She smiled when she read it. No one could find him after that. Not exactly. There were rumors of a man living in a rebuilt cabin near the edge of a federally protected ridge. A man who hiked trails before sunrise, who rebuilt footbridges with his own hands, who was often seen walking with a large German shepherd and 3 younger ones that always moved like a unit. Some claimed he still carried a weathered notebook filled with observations about tree growth, stream levels, and foxes that watched from the tree line. A few journalists tried to locate him, offering book deals and TV specials. They never got past the second bend in the trail, because the dog would appear, silent, unmoving, watching. And somehow they understood. This story wasn't theirs anymore. It belonged to the ridge, to the man who had nothing left, and the dog who chose to stay with him, to 3 pups who would grow up knowing how to listen to the wind and read the silence. One morning, months later, a small package arrived at Brooks's DC office. Inside was a photo, Jake sitting on the porch of the new cabin, the pups tumbling in the grass below, and Raya, regal and unblinking, standing watch at the top step. Below the photo, a line written in the same hand that had once marked maps and warnings. She didn't bark for attention. She barked because someone needed to be found. No signature. Brooks tucked the photo into her desk drawer. She didn't tell anyone. But every now and then she'd glance at it and feel steadier. Because some truths don't need speeches or headlines. They just need someone willing to stand in front of a fire and not move. Raya had done that. So had Jake. And no matter how much they tried to burn it down, the truth had survived. Because it had fur and scars and a name whispered only by those who had earned it. The ridge didn't look like much from above, just a stretch of stubborn green brushing against mist, outlined by the charred scars of what once tried to erase it. But to those who knew, it was a boundary line, between silence and truth, between what had burned and what refused to die. 3 weeks after the FBI closed their case, a small team returned to the mountain. Not in suits, not with cameras, but with boots and measuring poles, surveying every inch of the land where the fire had failed to reach the truth. Agent Natalie Brooks was among them, standing quietly as the Department of the Interior marked the final boundary lines with iron stakes. No development, no access roads, no private claims. One official declared, "This land is now federally protected wilderness, permanently." Brooks nodded, her eyes drifting to the rebuilt cabin in the distance. Smoke curled gently from its chimney. They called it Executive Directive 91B. Jake just called it home. He hadn't asked for the title they gave him. He didn't want it. But someone needed to be there, they'd said. Someone who understood the land, who knew what had nearly been lost and what still breathed beneath the pines. So they gave him a job no one else could take. No uniform, no salary, no badge. Just one line in a federal document buried deep in an appendix. Appointed steward of protected Ridge Sector B, indefinite term. Jake had laughed when he saw it. They could have just said, "I'm the guy with the dog." But they all knew better. The cabin had been rebuilt by veterans and volunteers, those who'd heard the story and showed up without being asked. They brought cedar, nails, old wood stoves, and new solar panels. They left behind food, tools, and notes carved into scraps of pine. For what you stood for. Jake accepted it quietly. He didn't say thank you out loud, but he sanded the porch smooth with his own hands, built the steps so Raya could lie on the top one and still see the ridgeline. And every morning he made coffee. 1 cup. Black. He'd sip it standing barefoot on the porch, while Raya sat beside him. Her ears twitched, always reading the wind. The 3 pups, now almost grown, had taken on roles of their own. Bo was the explorer, always vanishing into the trees and returning muddy with pride. Ash had the nose, tracking rabbit paths that twisted between rocks and moss. And Juno, the quiet one, liked to sit beside the firewood pile, staring at the stars long after the others had gone to sleep. They weren't guard dogs, they were guardians. The difference mattered. Jake kept to the routine. He patched fences that didn't need patching, cleared trails that no one used, recorded animal sightings for ranger reports he never sent. And when storms rolled in over the ridge, he'd stand just inside the doorway, hand resting on Raya's back, letting the thunder pass through them. But even in stillness, the past kept returning. One day, as he was digging new foundation posts for a shed, he found a half-burned crate buried beneath the soil. Metal plate on one side read, KM Field Asset 14C, Storage, Ridge Operation Only. Inside were soaked folders, a few intact maps, and a faded patch that read, Recon Ops. He handed it off to Brooks with no ceremony. Her only reply, You keep finding things no one else is supposed to. Jake shrugged. I've got 4 noses now. But the discovery sparked something unexpected. Hidden in the maps were coordinates that extended far beyond their sector, documented readings in other protected lands, dates that overlapped with forest fires and accidental landslides. The story wasn't over. Not entirely. Brooks offered him a new role, liaison between backcountry informants and the Bureau's Environmental Crimes Division. He declined. I already have a job, he said, watching a place that doesn't want to be watched. She didn't press it. Back on the ridge, life returned in quiet rhythms. The trees thickened, the scars softened. And on clear nights, when the moon laid silver on the trail, Jake would walk the full boundary line with Raya just ahead, the pups fanned out like sentries. Sometimes he'd find things. A cigarette butt left by a curious hiker, a scratched stone too smooth to be natural. He never left warnings, never chased them off. He just sat nearby with the dogs and let the presence speak for itself. One evening, he came back from the ridge to find a letter nailed to the cabin door. No return address, just a scrap of paper with rushed handwriting. You stop them here. Thank you. There are more places like this. He didn't keep it, but he remembered the tone. Someone out there still needed to know it could be done, that even if the fire came, even if the lies stacked up high, someone could hold the line. That night, Jake carved a new sign above the door. He didn't use words like veteran or hero. He didn't use names. He just carved what felt true. This ridge was almost lost. Now it watches back. And just below it, in smaller letters, she didn't bark to warn. She barked because it mattered. The next morning, Raya lay at the top step, head high, ears forward. The pups sat behind her like shadows. And somewhere beyond the trees, the wind stirred, like something had changed, or returned, or simply stopped running. The trees had begun to turn, rust red, brittle gold, and the soft greys of early frost settled along the ridge like a blanket pulled gently over the earth. The cabin stood quiet in the afternoon sun, smoke from the chimney rising in a slow twist above the trees. Jake was splitting firewood when the crunch of footsteps came up the path. Not cautious, not hurried, just light, with that unmistakable sound of someone unsure whether they should be there. He looked up. A high schooler, freckled face, backpack slung forward, holding a recorder and a folded notebook. "You must be Mr. Danner," the boy said, stopping a few feet away. "I'm Matthew, from North Ridge High. We're doing a profile on local guardians, people who keep places like this alive." Jake raised an eyebrow. "Local what?" The kid shifted. "My teacher said you were the Ridge Watchman, the guy who stayed after the fire, with the dog." Jake nodded once. That one's still true. Matthew hesitated. "Could I maybe ask a few questions? About you and Raya, and the dogs? We're trying to understand why people risk things to protect places most folks don't even know exist." Jake leaned the axe against the stump and wiped his hands on his jeans. "You bring any food for the answers?" The boy blinked. No, sir." Jake smirked. "Then you'll have to settle for a walk." They followed the edge of the ridge as the wind picked up, brushing through the trees in gentle pulses. Raya trotted ahead with steady steps. The pups moved like shadows, never too far, never too loud. "She's old now, right?" the boy asked after a long silence. Jake nodded. "Older than some lies that used to bury this place." Matthew flipped open his notebook. "Why did you stay when everyone else told you to leave?" Jake didn't answer at first. He let the question settle. Let the weight of it wrap around the clearing they were stepping into, the same spot where, months ago, they'd dug out the last of the buried crates, where silence had once screamed louder than flames. He walked over to the cabin gate, now stained dark with rain and sun. A new sign hung there, carved into a slab of pine wood that still held the scent of sap. Jake tapped it with a finger. "She didn't bark for food," he said. "She barked for the truth." Matthew stared at the sign, writing it down slowly. "Was it worth it?" Jake glanced at Raya. She was lying by the porch now, head up, watching the edge of the woods with calm alertness. Not tense, not expecting, just present. Still guarding, even in stillness. "You don't stay in a fight like that to win," Jake said. "You stay because no one else would. You stay because sometimes the only thing between right and wrong is a dog who won't back down." The boy swallowed. "Do people know what really happened?" "Some do," Jake said. "Some never will, but the ridge remembers." He didn't say more. He didn't need to. As the sun lowered behind the ridge, casting long shadows over the grass, Matthew turned off his recorder. "I think that's enough," he said quietly. "Thank you, sir." Jake gave a small nod. The boy started to walk back, then paused. "Do you think she knows? Raya, I mean, that she saved more than just land?" Jake looked at the old shepherd, now resting her chin on her paws, eyes still scanning the trees. "She knew the day the fire came," he said. "She just waited for the rest of us to catch up." The wind shifted again, carrying the smell of pine, the whisper of leaves, and something deeper, an echo of a story that still wasn't done being told. Jake stood alone for a moment longer, then sat on the porch beside Raya. The pups gathered near. He reached down, rubbed the back of her neck. "Still watching, girl." Her tail gave a slow thump, and together they watched the woods. Some guardians wear uniforms, some carry badges, but some just bark once, and that's enough to bring the truth back to the surface. What's your story with a loyal pet? If this story touched something inside you, help us keep telling them. Subscribe to German Shepherd, because loyalty like this deserves to be remembered.